You're viewing calisthenics completely wrong. In this video, we're going to cover exactly why most people struggle to progress in calisthenics and why the way you view this sport is the reason for your downfall. The most common thing I see with calisthenics nowadays is everyone views it as super complex or niche, right? However, all of the principles to attain strength in calisthenics are inherently the same, right? Let's talk about strength as a discipline first, because this is going to be the very basis I'm going to use to describe why you're viewing calisthenics the wrong way. So strength across different sports, whether it's gymnastics, calisthenics, powerlifting, weightlifting, the concept of how our body gets stronger is the same inherently. We can place stress on our body in multiple ways, right? Whether it be mechanically, neurologically, and our body will adapt to the stress and grow stronger, become more efficient. This is the very basis of what strength is. For example, when you go to the gym and you do bicep curls, for example, you push that muscle to failure, you accumulate enough mechanical tension to drive a hypertrophic response, right? The muscle grows back bigger, it becomes stronger, and next session, you're able to do more reps, right? Or maybe use a heavier weight. Another way our body can get stronger is through becoming more efficient. And what do I mean by that? Well, performing a movement long enough will teach our central nervous system how to perform that movement more efficiently, more correctly. For example, think back to when you were a kid, right? You spent months trying to get up and walk, and then all of a sudden, one day, you took your first few steps. And those first few steps quickly snowballed into you being able to walk without even thinking about it, right? This is another way our body can get stronger. So just to recap really quick, this is a very brief summary, right? We can place mechanical tension on our muscles to drive hypertrophy. Our muscle grows stronger, and the amount of contractile tissue that we actually have increases, right? We have more muscle fibers that will contract. The more muscle you have, the more potential you have for strength, okay? Now, the other way we can get stronger is by placing neurological stress on our body, right? Trying to perform a movement that we cannot yet do to drive our central nervous system to make the necessary adaptations to actually perform that movement. And although these two ways of increasing strength have their distinctions, they actually work in unison, right? For example, if you take someone, for example, like a top tier level bodybuilder and you throw him into calisthenics, he will be able to pick up many advanced calisthenics skills super quickly because his strength potential is much, much higher compared to someone who is maybe skinnier and doesn't have as much muscle. But this goes to say too that vice versa can be true. You can have someone who's super big and you can also have someone who's relatively skinny, and the skinny guy outperforms the guy who is larger from a muscular perspective. And this simply highlights the difference in CNS adaptations and efficiency. So now that we have kind of a rough understanding of strength and kind of the distinctions between neurological stress and mechanical stress, let's talk about why the way you view calisthenics is hindering your progress. So in calisthenics, our concrete goal is to drive central nervous system adaptations. Take even a beginner movement like the handstand. How do you learn the handstand the fastest way possible? Well, how I talked about in my tutorials, you want to do it as frequently as you can, right? Every single day, 20 to 30 minutes is ideal, right? Every single day. Think about the baby example, right? When you were trying to take your first few steps, you were trying every day without even thinking about it. You kept trying, and then boom, you got that first taste of what the movement actually felt like. And from there, things go exponentially up, right? So when we're talking about more coordination heavy skills like the handstand, the one-arm handstand, the handstand push-up, it is advised that you train much, much higher frequency, right? You don't even need to worry about having the best structure. As long as you're doing it as frequently as you possibly can, you will see way faster progress than if you were to program it like super structured 1 to 2 times a week. Because through this style of training, we are able to force rapidly adaptation, central nervous system adaptations, right? We don't care about mechanical tension, we care about the neurological stress that we're putting on our body, right? How I talked about in the initial part of this video, there's 2 ways we can get stronger: neurological central nervous system adaptations, or actually putting on more contractile tissue to have higher potential for strength. And so with virtually every skill in calisthenics, our main goal is to make our central nervous system become more efficient in utilizing the muscle that we do have to perform the skill. For example, in something like the front lever or the planche, although you may have sufficient muscle mass, you will not be able to hold it your first time doing it because your body has no clue how to actually recruit the muscle it does have to hold these positions. And so how do we build up to these skills, right? We'll maybe start with tuck planche or tuck front lever, advanced tuck planche, advanced tuck front lever, and we slowly build up the hierarchy, teaching our body more and more, giving it more data to work with to actually progress in the skill, to make those necessary adaptations. Now, I'm going to be going off topic a little bit, but this is a big calisthenics yap session, okay? I want to fill this with as much value as possible because all of these concepts that I talk about, I apply into my students' training, right? And so it's very important that you guys understand what I'm trying to say here. Let's take a step back and just simplify it a little bit. When you train, you put stress on your body. After training, your body recovers. It adapts to the stress that you gave it. Now, this is where things start to get nuanced. So let's say you're training the planche 6 times a week and someone else is training the planche 2 times a week. Both people can progress at the same rate, right? Hear me on this. Both people can progress at the same rate as long as they adhere to the foundational principles of calisthenics, okay? And strength training in general. Not calisthenics, but strength training in general. The guy training 6 times a week, of course, is gonna have much more sub-maximal intensity, right? Way easier work, not as stressful on the body, because when we put stress on the body, the adaptations that occur will scale proportionately with the amount of stress that we employ onto our body, okay? For example, if you do a planche session where you're training for 2 hours, doing everything at around 80 to 90% intensity, spamming attempts, the amount of time that your body needs to adapt to that stress is going to be much longer compared to someone who's training 6 times a week and their trainings are only 30 to 45 minutes and they're working with maybe more resistance bands, shying away from failure, right? They can come back and train the next day. Now, both have their benefits and both have their cons, right? A lot of top athletes in the sport that you look up to, right? Whether it's Ilias, Dailong, Onizuka, they employ really high frequency training and you're watching them doing 50 front lever rows and you expect to somehow translate this into your own training. But understand that intensity is subjective. For example, Dailong doing a Maltese is the same intensity as you doing a push-up, okay? But it took him a decade worth of training to get up to that point, okay? That's what you guys have to realize is this is a long-term game of adaptations. And whether you're training 2 times a week, 6 times a week, it doesn't matter. It's all related to the amount of total stress that you're putting on yourself in each workout and how much time you give yourself to actually adapt to that stress, okay? That's why there is no one method that works. There is no one secret method that's gonna get you the results that you want. And so to further highlight this, let's go back to the 80s. During the 80s era of weightlifting or powerlifting, there were 2 notorious methods that were used that actually produced some of the strongest athletes of all time. Some of the records still have not been beaten today, despite it almost happening 50 years ago. There was the Soviet style method and there was the Bulgarian method. Let's start with the Soviet method. The Soviet method's ideology was training with sub-maximal intensity frequently and purely focused on refining technique. They believed that if you did enough sub-maximal work with perfect technique, it would yield in maximal strength gains. Now, the Bulgarian method was the complete opposite of that. Their motto was every day is PR day. Now, both methods created world-class athletes, okay? This is where things get really interesting. How can 2 completely different schools of thought lead to the same outcome? Let's first talk about the Bulgarian method because it's a little bit sporadic. Every single day you were doing upwards of 20 to 30 attempts at 90 to 95% intensity. I highly encourage you guys to look into this more so you guys get a more detailed explanation, but I'm not going to go into the super specifics, right? But just understand that it was way more super intense work, all right? Basically, their goal was, okay, we're gonna take 100 athletes, we're gonna apply this method, and it's going to work on 2 to 3 people. And it's going to work extremely well, okay? These people are genetic outliers. Their body can withstand this amount of intensity and it actually works in favor of them, okay? And these people went on to become world-class athletes and their record's not even close to being touched till this day. Whereas the Russian method, instead of taking 100 people, applying the method to filter out the genetic phenoms, the Russian method was more focused on finding the exact weaknesses of the person and honing in on them through immense amount of volume training, through immense amount of volume with perfect technique, okay, to actually fix those weaknesses and those bottlenecks. Both methods have various different strategies, right? For example, on the Soviet side of things, you have step loading, you have variable loading, you have wave loading, and you guys can look into all of that, but that more deals with the specific portions of the mesocycle, right? The 4 to 6 week time frames, altering grip variations or tempo of the repetitions, all these little minute variables. But basically what I'm trying to get at with this whole point is that the reason you are failing to progress in calisthenics is because you're viewing things as black and white. You're trying to have the most perfect structure or trying to find the next best routine you can follow. But you have to understand that it doesn't matter. Some methods will work really well for others and other methods will not work at all. In fact, it might even hinder you if you try to train like someone else. And now you're probably asking, well, how the hell do I know how to actually train calisthenics? Like, I have all these dream skills I want to achieve. How do I actually achieve them? Again, it's not black and white. And largely, you have to build your training intuition. You have to become very knowledgeable about your own body, about your own performance. You have to listen to yourself. You have to test things out. You have to try cycles where you do more very frequent work that's more submaximal, or try other mesocycles where you're more pushing intensity. Combine the two, right? There's no one size fits all. But there are principles that you have to respect. Going back to my simplified version, right? We put stress on our body and adaptations occur. As long as we proportionately respect these two factors, which means we put this amount of stress and we also give this amount of time for adaptations to occur. As long as these things aren't out of balance, we will be good to go. So for example, just to further illustrate the point, very high level athletes in calisthenics that you guys probably see on Instagram all the time, some of them are training 2 times a day, 6 times a week. So what does that mean? If there's very little time for the adaptation to occur, that means there's very little stress to match that time recovery period, right? You guys are starting to understand here. Now, let's talk about one of the best deadlifters in the world. The current world record holder for one of the strongest deadlifts in the world had 14 days between deadlift training sessions, okay? 14 days. Why 14 days? Because after enough years of training, after having enough coaches around him, they understood that, okay, if we do a super heavy deadlift day, it's going to take our central nervous system 14 days to recover and make the necessary adaptations to then go in again and do it all over again, okay? So, less stress, less time needed to adapt to that stress. More stress, more time needed to adapt to that stress. Stress is subjective. Just because Dailong can train Maltese 6 times a week does not mean you can, okay? So your goal in calisthenics is to build your training intuition. You have to go into sessions and start listening to your body. After how many sets do you start to feel tired? How many intense sets does it take for you to feel completely drained? Let's say you do a super intense day. How many days does it take for you to feel like you're ready to go again? These are all things that you need to collect data on, right? And over time, you will start to see patterns emerge. Everyone has different tolerances to how much stress they can handle. If you're a taller, heavier athlete like myself, you're not abiding to the same rules as a shorter and lighter athlete. These are all things that you need to take into account that all contribute to the total stress you're placing on your central nervous system. That's why periods where you experience high stress levels, whether it's from working a job or losing a loved one or relationship troubles, training usually suffers during this time. Cortisol spikes, right? Our stress hormone spikes. Recovery becomes impeded, right? We are recovering slower. This all contributes to our stress, right? This all contributes to our stress. So it's very important to have a general understanding and build an intuition so you can know for yourself how long it takes for the adaptations to occur given this amount of stress I'm placing. Remove the notion of structure entirely. Having a rough idea of the exercise you're gonna do, right? Just like from a large perspective, like if I'm trying to achieve planche, I know most of my training is gonna be centered around static holds or dynamic variations of the planche. And so these exercises are gonna be my tools I can use to place stress on my body to get those adaptations. If my goal is to become a specialist at planche push-ups, then most of the stress I'm placing on my body should be in the form of planche push-ups and static planche holds. The stress you feed your body is the data you're feeding your body. Your body's going to synthesize this data and project it outwards. So how you train, what you train, is going to dictate what you're good at and how good you are at it. So how you train and what you do is going to ultimately dictate what you're good at. For example, Onizuka is a pull specialist, mainly specializes in pull. He is the best puller in the world for a reason. Dai Long, the best Malteser in the world for a reason. Most of the years he spent training has been focused on perfecting that skill, that specific movement. That's why he might be disproportionately stronger in Maltese compared to his planche, compared to other athletes, because he's fed his body way more data about this specific thing compared to other people, okay? So ultimately, what you train, how long you've been training it, will determine how good you are at it. I want you to also think about it this way. I want you guys to look up super compensation graph, okay? Training super compensation graph. You'll see a graph that kind of looks like this, okay? So when we apply that stress, right, our body temporarily dips in terms of performance, how we feel, which makes sense. We put stress on it, so now the body's in a weakened state and needs to recover. During that recovery period where that adaptation is occurring, we start to see a trend upwards, right? The body's now super compensating. It's above baseline now. So baseline is here. This is before the training. This is shortly after the training. And this is when enough time has passed and we start to super compensate. So now our body's actually stronger, more efficient than last time. And our goal is to train when we're super compensated as much as we can, okay? We want to time the stress that we're putting on our body in that super compensated state. Because now, when we're super compensated, we apply stress, we dip down, we're still above base level from the initial training, and then we recover, we super compensate again, and we keep going up, up, up. And that's how you see exponential progress. That's why maybe when you guys see some of my students, the progress is unbelievable, because when you understand these concrete principles, it becomes very easy to spot when you're in this down period or when you're super compensating. Now, the last thing I want to highlight about this whole thing is if you look up the graph, you'll also see after you super compensate, if you don't train, if you don't apply stress, your body will just revert back to baseline where it normally was. So if you mistime the training and you maybe wait an extra few days, your performance will be worse because that period of super compensation is over. For example, let's take the deadlift example of the guy who was deadlifting once every 14 days. If he were to deadlift on, let's say, the 16th or the 17th day, you might be thinking, well, that gave him more time to recover, he's gonna be stronger. Wrong. Central nervous system adaptations, especially new ones, are temporary, which means that you can lose them. So if he did take those extra few days of rest, his performance will be worse than if he were to train on that 14th day when he was super compensated. I know it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all this information, but I promise you, if you start training and you start tracking everything you do, it doesn't matter if you do things right, wrong, you can do things as sloppy as you want. But as long as you're starting to build that training intuition with yourself, you start gathering data, you start figuring out, okay, how many sets does it take for me to start feeling tired? You're going to find something that works perfectly for you. And this all ties back to viewing calisthenics as a super structured, super methodical, systematic thing is the worst thing that you can do. If you have structure, if you have a set routine and you don't allow for auto-regulation, you're setting yourself up for failure. You can't expect your body to perform the same way every single week on each same training day. It's just not realistic, especially in a sport like this where the main way we express our strength is through neurological stress and adapting to that stress. There are many confounding variables that could influence that stress apart from training. And so to expect yourself to be able to consistently train on a given routine, the same performance, is just wrong. That's why having that intuition is super important. You can start to auto-regulate. You start to actually feel more free with your training. You start to enjoy training more because you're not bummed out when this is supposed to be a PR day and it went to shit. You're not going to feel bad because you wouldn't even go for a PR on that day in the first place. Does that make sense? You're basically setting yourself up for success if you start looking at things as more fluid. You're not expecting yourself to do the same thing every day. On days you feel very sad, you don't want to do work. You want to just sit in bed, eat ice cream, and watch a show, right? On days you feel good, you feel confident, your mental energy's high, you're doing more work, you're being productive. Training is the same way. If your body is not ready and you're trying to push it, it can only lead to worse things. For example, back to the graph really quickly. If you train while you're in this recovering stage, you're going to drive it lower and lower and lower, never allowing yourself the ability to compensate for that stress. This is why there's a big problem plaguing calisthenic athletes in the space. Your favorite influencers most likely don't know how to train. You know someone knows how to train when they can replicate it in other people. If they work with other individuals and they are able to give them the same results that they have achieved, they understand how to train. Some of your favorite influencers who you maybe look up to, who spam aura videos or whatever it is, they most likely don't know how to train because they don't even know how they got there in the first place. Like I said, being a heavy and taller athlete has its nuanced approach in calisthenics. You cannot train it the same way as people who are shorter and lighter. And that's why many coaches who are really advanced even struggle to coach others because they are sitting from a position where maybe the first time they tried a planche, they held straddle. Well, how the hell are you going to coach someone who's 6'2" and is really strong but cannot even tuck planche, right? He has a strong background but cannot even tuck planche. Like, you have not faced those problems on your own, and so you might be disconnected from some of the things that you have to learn along the way to actually help someone like that. So I hope this video opened your guys' eyes to how you should view calisthenics. Definitely, if you guys have questions, drop them in the comments or head over to my community Discord that's linked in the description below, where you guys can talk to me and other high-level athletes. We'll be more than happy to answer your guys' questions. Just understand that calisthenics is fluid. Stop looking at it as super rigid. Stop looking for the perfect training program, because the truth is there's no perfect training program. We've seen it in history. We see it now, right? The goal is to build your intuition and find the approach that works best for you. And if you are struggling to do that, then maybe some third-person insight from a coach who understands everything could help you arrive at these conclusions. If you guys made it this far, drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more informational calisthenics content. Stay tuned for more tutorials coming soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one.